Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Riemens. It's a little strange because I'm the current CEO of the venue in Amsterdam, responsible for conferences and exhibitions. But to give you an insight, my career was about 35 in aviation. That started in the early 80s, and I got my pilot license when I was 19 or 20. And after 35 years of aviation, I just decided to start a total new career. But because of my network in the past, it was very attractive to use my knowledge to organize something that adds value to, I would say, aviation or to society as a whole. And together with Patrick Key, he's the Director General of EASA, the Safety Authority. We said, listen, there's really room for organizing an event in Amsterdam around the development of drones. And on my fourth slide, the 100 years of aviation is put in one slide. And for me, I started aviation in the late 70s. And I still remember when I went to Schiphol with my father, where there were still propeller aircraft taking you with a DC-3 or a DC-6 to Spain. And for me, aviation was something very special. So if you see the development of aviation in all those years, I saw a sequence of inventions. And it was, I would not say easily to follow, but for me it was not a big step in my mind, coming from a propeller aircraft to a jet propulsion aircraft towards a totally digitized aircraft, what we now have in the current time frame. And I still remember when I was at a conference in the US where some military people came to me by, let me see if I got the next slide. It doesn't work. Let me see. Yes. It was during a conference where people gave a presentation on UAVs and drones. And they had a small movie to show what it actually was. It was quite unstable, and they were pretty aggressive about forecasting the future and what drones could bring to society and aviation as a whole. And I still remember that I was rather a skeptic, because, you know, what I saw in the past, it takes you 60, 70 years to bring it to the market. So I must say that I was a little bit arrogant by saying, listen, guys, this is never going to happen. We have air traffic management. We have all kinds of authorities. A lot of enterprises were owned by the state, and it will never happen that fast. Now, if I see, slide doesn't work. Something is wrong with the slides. Okay, I will do it in a direct way. After 30 years, I suddenly discovered that they are everywhere. They're in all kinds of industries, whether it's agriculture, whether it's traffic control, whether it's in all kinds of cities. And to me, I missed something in the development of this industry, because my thinking was always in a linear way. But what I discovered through time is that the difference in how this is developed is totally different. Because what I initially saw is that exponential growth of UAVs and drones is initially slower than a linear growth. We now come in a time frame where things are developed and progressing really fast. And I'll give you some insight on this, because the background of an aircraft and a drone is totally different. If you look to an aircraft, and I don't need to explain this community, that this is based on a very advanced concept, which is improved in hundreds, in 100 years in the past. And if you look to drones, the technique is rather simple, but it started with a digital approach. Aircraft are very expensive. A drone, it's already possible. I was in China where you can buy a drone for $1. It's unbelievable. If you look to an aircraft, it's very complex. It has a lot of subsystems. If you look to a drone, it's rather simple and it's focused on how to use it. An aircraft is focusing on transport. If you look to a drone, it's used in almost any industry. And sometimes you don't see them because they're operating already in a big network. And if you look to aviation and aircraft, it's always airport based. You need to have an airport to operate an aircraft. If you look to drones, it's possible for an individual just to buy a drone and to use it in your own garden, or in an urban environment, or in a remote environment. And what you also see is that the whole discussion and development with drones is around unmanned vehicles, which is, I think, totally different when you compare that to the past and the development of an aircraft. Now, if you have a solid understanding on how the development of drones will look like, and you look to the forecasted market, which is already into place, you see a 7-fold development of the market between 2025 and 2035. And if I look in my own environment, and I work in the city of Amsterdam, you don't see many drones. You see some initiatives, you see all kinds of presentations, you see producers and manufacturers bringing all kind of new knowledge and content to the world that it's going to happen, but it's still not there. But that has to do with exponential growth. And if I look to the next step, and I look to the market on a regional basis, it initially started in the US with a rapid growth in Europe, but last year, a year ago, more than a year ago, I was in China. For a moment. I was in China visiting EHang Research Institute, and if you see how much energy and equity is put in the development of transport of people via drones, this is immense. If you see the complexity of how they develop a total infrastructure based on drones, it's immense. I was in 6 cities in China, and they designed certain parts in cities to travel via the air with drones, unmanned. And what I foresee is that if you look to the payload and the range that is involved with mobility of personnel, this is in the stage of a tipping point where we will have drones in the next coming 5 years that are able to travel over a distance of about 100 kilometers with a drone. And this gives an enormous room for improvement, because these kind of vehicles will be used in cities. And what we now see on a global basis is that they build infrastructures for drones, whether it's a charging spot for drones, whether it's a spot where you're able to land or to depart, whether this is in an environment where people actually live. You see, whether it's in the Middle East, in China, in the US, all kind of bottom-up initiatives where they are building a total infrastructure. On a global level, you see that there's a competition between the regions, between the traditional manufacturers of aircraft and organizations like EHang, where they just started with a drone. All kind of initiatives driving change on a local basis. You see in Europe, but also in the Asian Pacific and in the US, all kind of initiatives where they build infrastructures based on current regulations. If you look to Europe, you see that EASA has put in place regulations that can be used in the next coming years to actually build an infrastructure that people can actually use drones in an urban environment. You see cities that start projects actually using drones in a urban environment. And I must admit that in all those years, I was rather skeptic that this was actually possible. And in the techniques and the visitors I've seen in the past 3 to 5 years, I'm impressed in what's going to happen. This is an integral part of mobility because into today technology, it's not always clear whether it's a car, an aircraft, or a drone. That mobility is just one seamless kind of infrastructure. And what we see is that drones will be an integral part of society and will be put forward, and that people will have the possibility to travel via a drone. In the next coming years, and we are at the tipping point of that, we foresee that in 2025 up to 2042, this will be an integral part of society. Now, to conclude my presentation, because I'm open to discussion and questions, growth will remain exponential, and that will be not easy to follow. It is different than if you look back to the history of aviation. The development of drones and mobility via air, via UAVs, will come via cities. Social acceptance is key, because what we see in the different regions, that social acceptance is different, and it's dependent on a culture. It's also dependent on the problems of individual systems. What you also see is that it's not just developing an aircraft or a drone, it's about an infrastructure, it's about regulation, it's about social acceptance. So building an ecosystem is relevant for every stakeholder and needs to participate in the total development of such an infrastructure. It's multi-purpose. It's not only about the transport of people, it's also about transport of goods. It's about inspection. The amount of possibilities is endless. I'd like to focus that it's not actually aviation, however, both use air to maneuver. And I think for this community, it's important that the knowledge this industry is bringing is key to the development of these infrastructures and drone as a whole. I'm open for questions. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you very much for your explanation on the drone side of aviation. You are spot on with respect to time, so we have some time for questions. So I would urge the students at home, if you have more questions to Paul, please send them to me. There's the first one coming, and I will use those to trigger the discussion. Well, Paul, as you know, Embraer is very active in, well, we don't call it drones, we call it eVTOL, our EV project. A couple of weeks ago, we saw United invest in the Archer company. So I think there's an emerging interest in urban mobility. And I think you're right, that will take a flight pretty soon. But it also has the necessary challenges. So the first question that came in is how to deal with the amount of regulations around drone flights, interfering with flight routes, etc.
Well, I'm used to, I would say, a very rigid framework for regulation. And the discussion I'm having with EASA is that it needs to be performance-based. So if you're able to show the authorities that you meet a certain performance, then you have your license to operate. And that's, I think, different when you look to aviation. So if authorities like EASA or the CAA or whatever, or the FAA in the US, in order not to be the blocking factor in the development of this new industry. I think the way forward is to have a performance-based kind of scenario.
Thank you very much. That brings me to another question. Drones are great for very short distances, but the cost will skyrocket if to be used for longer sectors. Is a comparison to traditional aircraft not too much out of context?
I think when I first started really thinking about drones, my first impression was that long range, high payload was impossible. But what I've seen, if electricity is not going to be the basis, but there might be other possibilities for UAVs or whatever name you're going to give it. I'm sure that I see, and I had a slide in my presentation where you see the direction on the development of this, that just like cars on the road, batteries will improve, engines will improve, drones will become lighter, that I foresee a longer range type of vehicles into the next coming future. So I foresee that engineering is going to help us, and in all kind of inventions will help us out in the current difficulties we're having with drones on this.
Very good, thank you. And you're mentioning other sources of fuel. Now we're all thinking electric because we know the drones that we buy in shops. But the other propulsions you mentioned, we just talked about hydrogen with Airbus. Is there any other propulsion you have in mind that could power bigger drones in the future?
Not directly, but I've seen a prototype of a network of drones that were able to charge themselves during day hours and to stay aloft for a longer period. So it's also, of course, dependent on the weight and what it can carry. So I was impressed what kind of inventions were there to keep these kind of drones aloft. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, because you can engineer in different directions, whether it's on weight, whether it's on range. All these kind of things are improved step by step. So I have no idea where this is going to end.
And going back to the regulation, one of the students is wondering, with EASA taking more the lead on setting the framework for regulations, do you think that will help or hamper getting to drone regulations quickly?
Well, the RAI as a venue is looking for the development of a drone port in the next coming years, whether this is feasible, yes or no. I know that traditional aviation organizations are not the only one that can use the framework of regulation by EASA in their direct environment. So what I'm trying to do is to use this framework to get a permit on a regional basis for the usage of drones. And I think that this framework, which is of course a European framework, can be used by nations and national authorities and national entrepreneurs to make it work. And of course, the state plays an important role there. But what I foresee is that this regulation will be done on a European level, and that might be helpful. But it's not quite clear whether this is actually going to happen, yes or no. But for the next coming 2 to 3 years, this will be the question.
And we tend to think towards the Netherlands and the EU. You talked about China in your speech. What do you believe are the first cities globally that could move into urban mobility through drones?
I'm very positive about what we do in Europe, but what I've seen in the Middle East and Dubai, and also in Shenzhen in China. I think their pace is much higher. They have more room to maneuver. It has to do with their culture. What I've seen in South America is problem-based, for instance, because they have a lot of congestion on the road, so they try to find ways to maneuver via air, and then suddenly you see that authorities are open for these kind of developments. When I look in Europe and in the Netherlands, social acceptance might be less if it comes to privately used drones.
Thank you, Paul. And linking to that, when you talk about drones, people quickly start to think about autonomy.
What developments in air traffic management do you expect in the future for urban eVTOL? And do you believe there's an opening there to go to unmanned flight as well rather quickly? Or will that take a lot longer?
I think this I can remember the first discussions with the authorities about using drones, that people actually using drones needed to have a pilot license to operate. This is still the case, but I think, again, performance-based, that if we have a high level of automation in drones and the amount of incidents remain low, and progression is made via small steps, it might end up into a world where automation is the basis for safety. But this needs to be proven in time. And I'm not sure whether air traffic management is going to be the central player there. I think from a conservative traditional approach, this might be a feasible way forward, but that needs to be proven in time.
Okay.
Paul, thank you very much. There's a few more questions, but in view of time, we'll have to end the conversation here.